Well, hello there, and welcome to Subversive Radio. I'm your host, Keith Giles. Hey, we are going to talk a little bit in this podcast, I'm excited, about Jesus without religion or politics. And that is the title of a series of meetings I'll be doing starting tomorrow night. That's, I'm not sure when you're listening to this, but for me, tomorrow night is July the 15th. That's Wednesday, about this time, about 6:30 p.m., on Wednesday, July 15th, and we'll do a series of meetings every Wednesday night, go until the end of August, at Fuller Seminary. They're great, very graciously loaning me the use of one of their classrooms. And this is a series of meetings that I set up on meetup.com, and this will be for non-Christians to come and to know it's a safe place. I'm not going to try and sell them something. I'm not trying to convert them to Christianity. I'm not trying to get them to buy my book or to do anything. I'm just there to answer their questions about Jesus. So the goal is to gather people that are genuinely curious about Jesus and would love to know more about who was Jesus and what about him, what did he teach, and what was he all about, and just to learn more about Jesus, but again, apart from all these sort of entanglements and baggage that comes with him. So what I wanted to talk about in this podcast was a little bit about what we're going to talk about in the meeting. This is sort of a sneak preview, by the way. What we're going to talk about in our first session tomorrow night. So since it's our first session, again, I have no way of knowing how many people are going to come. I could have one person, I could have two people, I could have 6 people, I could have 30. I really don't know. Meetup is not so great about, and again, it's not their fault. You just don't know. People say they're coming and you don't know if they're coming. And then I think there's some people coming who have not signed up at all on meetup.com, but have heard about it and are planning to come. So we'll see how many people I have. And again, we'll also see how many of them are actually non-Christians. Here's what's kind of been, it's almost a comedy of errors, I guess you could say. So one unintended byproduct of my setting up this meetup group for non-Christians who want to know about Jesus without religion or politics is that I got a whole bunch of Christians who signed up. And so to sort of create another group for Christians who want Jesus without religion or politics, I had to start a second meetup group, which will start next Monday night at a local coffee shop. And that one's for Christians specifically because I had so many Christians. I'll probably have a ton of Christians show up to this thing. And so I wanted to start one group, and I ended up starting 2 groups. And now I've got 2 groups that are going to be going twice a week, one on Monday, one on Wednesday. So even more work for me. My good friend Dan Naughty is going to be helping me on the Monday night group for Christians. And my wife Wendy, my lovely, awesome wife Wendy, is going to be helping me for the Wednesday night groups. So anyway, I've got 2 of these groups that are going on at the same time. So anyway, if I can actually get non-Christians to show up on Wednesday night, I thought what I would do to start off is just kind of do an overview, of course, of why we're doing this and what it's all about and what my goals are, what I hope to do in this series of meetings, but also to find out about them. Why are they here and what do they hope to get out of this? So we're going to spend some time at the beginning just getting to know each other. I want to hear from them, what is it, why they were attracted to this group, what they hope to get out of this group, and also to weed out any Christians who've still managed by at this point to not figure out that this isn't for non-Christians and to get them identified and hopefully onto the Monday night group. But also, again, what I'm more and more impressed with as I've been praying about this and preparing for this is that more important than, the teaching, more important than the academic side of it or the Bible study side of it or the apologetic side of it or any of that, more important than that, I really feel impressed more and more and more that especially for the group on Wednesday nights, that what God wants me to focus on is love, just how much he loves them. That for me, and this has been my prayer, that God would give me such a love for these people who come, such a heart for them. And I'm praying that Jesus would give me eyes to see them the way he sees them and to love them the way he loves them. So that, it doesn't matter what we talk about. It doesn't matter what our discussion, what we get into or not. Just above all, I want them to know how much God loves them. And I really have been praying that Wendy and I can communicate that in just various ways So please pray with us about that Wendy and I would really just be able to love on them, to bless them, to let them know how loved they are. And I mean that in a genuine way, that they would really, really know it, how much they're loved. So we'll spend some time at the beginning getting to know them. And then I've got this crazy idea, this timeline. Of course, this is not a video podcast, so I cannot draw this for you. And if I did, you would be very unimpressed. But I just felt the need. I needed to draw this out, okay? So there's a whiteboard there in the classroom where we're going to be in, and I'm going to draw this, basically a timeline, okay? And we're going to start with Jesus, right? And so put a little dot there on the timeline. That's Jesus. And then Jesus really, he was only here about 33 years, and only the last 3 years of his life, he had a 3-year ministry. So with just three little years of ministry, Jesus created this shockwave, this explosion, this ripple throughout all of space and time that it's still reverberating to this very moment. We are still talking about Jesus in 2015. And again, this guy that, when you think about it, really, he didn't write a book. He didn't build any huge thing. He didn't, he had a 3-year ministry. He said a few things, taught a few things. Some, did some miracles, did some pretty astounding things, but ultimately was arrested and tortured and put to death. Wow. Okay. And yet the ripples and the reverberations are still going, the ripples are still carrying forward to this very day. But on my timeline, then I would also I would draw, here's the 1st century, and then here's the 2nd century, and here's the 3rd century. And then in that little section of 1, 2, and 3, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries, I'm going to put a couple of dots there for things like the Didache, the Gospel of Mark, when it was written, and the other Gospels, and the letters of Paul, and the ministry of Paul, and that kind of thing. What kind of transpired in the first 100 years in the 2nd century and then the 3rd century. And then, of course, we have Constantine. There's a big dividing mark there when Constantine shows up in the 3rd century. And then following that, we had things like the Crusades, and then we had the Reformation, and then we had dispensationalism in 1830. And then, of course, the founding of America and where we are today with an American version of Christianity that's very co-opted by political movements and that kind of a thing. And all of those things, and if we were to kind of continue the timeline beyond that to 2015 and draw a little stick man, right? And that's where we are today. And that little stick man is trying to look back all the way back to the left, the far beginning of our timeline, where Jesus is at the other end of the timeline. And what the reason I wanted to draw this timeline was to illustrate the fact that between us here in 2015 on the far right of the timeline and Jesus all the way back 2,000 years ago on the far left of the timeline, there's all this stuff in between us and Jesus. And a lot of it, my contention is, my belief is, that a lot of it, certainly from the 3rd century on, and certainly from the time of Constantine forward, a lot of it distracts us and creates a lot of noise that we really can't hear Jesus very well because of all this other junk, right? All this other man-made practice and theology and denominationalism and nationalism and just all this kind of garbage that gets in the way. And so the goal and the hope that I have in this series of meetings is to, unfortunately I cannot wipe away all those things. I wish I could. I wish I could completely do away with all those things, but I can't. So, but for the moment, I'd like for us to be able, if we could, to push those things aside and as best we can take a look at Jesus way back there on the other side of the timeline, at the beginning of the timeline, and what he said and what he taught, and maybe a little bit about what some other people said about him, and see if we can, if it's possible, get a better idea for who Jesus really was and what is it about him that makes him so powerful and so, what is it about him that makes such a huge difference? So I've also got some quotes I want to read about Jesus. I'll read a few of them here on the podcast for you. I don't want to bore you, but some of them are pretty awesome. One of them that I want to read is dealing a little bit with the skeptical side of it. Because, of course, there are some people who want to say that, well, Jesus is a made-up person. Jesus is a fairy tale. There was no actual Jesus of Nazareth. That's all made up. That's just completely fabrication from, let's say, the Catholic Church or the Christian Church or what have you to control people and and blah, blah, blah. And so what I wanted to read, I want to start off reading, is a quote by a guy, many of you are probably familiar with him. His name is Dr. Bart Ehrman. Now, if you don't know who Bart Ehrman is, let me just say Bart Ehrman is a non-Christian skeptic. And to call him a non-Christian skeptic is very tame. If you've ever heard him speak or read any of his books, I think more accurately what you would say about Dr. Bart Ehrman is that Bart Ehrman is a raging anti-Christian evangelist whose main goal and passion in his life is to bring as many people as possible to doubt the Bible and Christianity. It's his mission in life, okay? He is in absolutely no way whatsoever, is Bart Ehrman on the side of the Christian. Keeping that in mind, understanding that he is a hostile source, I want to read this. This was a quote from Bart Ehrman. He said, quote, "I don't think there's any serious historian who doubts the existence of Jesus. There are a lot of people who want to write sensational books and make a lot of money who say Jesus didn't exist. But I don't know any serious scholar who doubts the existence of Jesus. So, absolutely, Jesus existed. We have more evidence for Jesus' existence than for anyone else in that time period. I'm not saying this as a believer. I'm not a believer. But as an historian, I'm saying you can't just dismiss the evidence and say, we don't know. There is hard evidence." Close quote. And that is what I'd like to kick off with, because this idea, this skepticism, right, that, well, how do we know Jesus existed? No, we can't know. We really can't know. Well, if a guy who is as skeptical and anti-faith as Dr. Bart Ehrman can say that about Jesus, can say, look, we can argue about a lot of things, but here's what we can't argue about. Jesus existing. Yes, he absolutely existed, and we have more hard evidence that Jesus of Nazareth existed than we can prove that anybody else existed at the time period. So a lot of good evidence about that. So some other quotes, and again, these other quotes are really more just to emphasize, I wanted to illustrate just the impact that the person of Jesus has had on the world and on society and on our culture. And going back to that timeline idea, a guy that lived in a little obscure town of Nazareth, who only ministered for about 3 years in the early first century, and then was executed publicly and humiliated. By the way, along with a whole lot of other messiahs who also showed up about the same time and said, "I'm the Messiah," and got arrested and killed and destroyed and executed by the Romans. No different than many others in his time period. And yet, Jesus, along that timeline, has impacted many, many people of notoriety and various levels. So, for example, one of them is Gandhi. Gandhi says, "I've regarded Jesus of Nazareth as one amongst the mighty teachers that the world has had. I shall say to the Hindus that your lives will be incomplete unless you reverently study the teachings of Jesus." Muhammad says, the religion of Islam says, this, by the way, what I'm going to read you is not only quoted in the Quran, it's an inscription within the Dome of the Rock, the temple of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. And it says this about Jesus: "O God, bless your messenger and your servant Jesus, son of Mary. Peace be on him the day he was born, and the day he dies, and the day he shall be raised alive. Such was Jesus, son of Mary, a statement of the truth concerning which they doubt." Napoleon said of Jesus, "I know men, and I tell you that Jesus Christ is not a man. Superficial minds see a resemblance between Christ and the founders of empires and the gods of other religions. That resemblance does not exist. It is not so with Christ. Everything in him astonishes me. His spirit overawes me, and his will confounds me. Between him and everyone else in the world, there is no possible term of comparison. He is truly a being by himself. I will tell you, Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, and myself have founded great empires, but our empires were founded on force. Jesus alone founded his empire on love, and to this day, millions would die for him. I think I understand something of human nature, and I tell you, all these were men, and I am a man. Jesus Christ was more than a man." What shall we say here? Dostoevsky said this: "I believe there is nothing lovelier, deeper, more sympathetic, more rational, more manly, and more perfect than the Savior. I say to myself with jealous love that not only is there no one else like him, but that there could be no one. Charles Dickens says, "My dear children, I am very anxious that you should know something about the history of Jesus Christ, for everybody ought to know about him. No one ever lived who was so good, so kind, so gentle, and so sorry for all people who did wrong or were in any way ill or miserable as he was." Florence Nightingale says, "Jesus Christ raised women above the condition of mere slaves, mere ministers to the passions of the man, raised them by his sympathy to be ministers of God." Soren Kierkegaard, who, by the way, had lots of great things to say about Jesus. This is just one of them. He says, "There is only one eternal hope on this earth, to follow Christ into heaven. There is one blessed joy in this life, to follow Christ. In death there was one final blessed joy, to follow Christ to life." H.G. Wells says, "I am not a believer, but I must confess as a historian that this penniless preacher from Nazareth is irrevocably the very center of history. Jesus Christ is easily the most dominant figure in all history." So, and then finally, a quote by Albert Einstein. By the way, this is a real quote, not one of those cheap internet quotes where people will put Einstein's face and create some sort of a meme where Einstein said something he didn't say. This is an actual quote from Einstein. Einstein said, "I am a Jew, but I am enthralled by the luminous figure of the Nazarene. No one can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life." Wow. And then I wanted to spend a little time just talking about, in general, this is just something on my own I noticed a couple of years ago. I don't work for a Christian company. I work for a large technology distributor here in Southern California. And I work in the marketing department. Pardon me, having some tea. I work in the marketing department as a copywriter, doing advertising and marketing for them. And I hear people all the time. I started noticing that we'd be in meetings or just in conversations, and people unknowingly, they don't realize they're doing it. And I think this happens in everyday conversation. Will use a phrase that actually they don't know it, but they're quoting Jesus. These are phrases that originated in the Gospels. They originate from the mouth of Jesus. And I just want to read some of these ideas and concepts. Some of them, of course, make sense. But some of them you may not realize that Jesus is the one who coined, if you will, these phrases. For example, someone says, "going the extra mile." That's Jesus. If someone says, "the truth will set you free," that's Jesus. If someone says, "well, the spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak," that's Jesus. Jesus also says, "beware of wolves in sheep's clothing." The whole idea of a good Samaritan, that's Jesus. If someone's saying, "hey, you know what, he's a good guy, he's the salt of the earth," that's Jesus. The idea of, "hey, don't cast your pearls before swine," that's Jesus. The concept of the blind leading the blind, that's Jesus. The idea of counting the cost before you get started, that's Jesus. Of course, the idea of doing unto others as you want them to do unto you, that's Jesus. The phrase, "don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing," that was Jesus. The phrase, "man does not live by bread alone," that's Jesus. The idea of walking the straight and narrow path, of course, that's Jesus. And of course, turning the other cheek is Jesus. And the idea of the prodigal son returns is also Jesus. And so, obviously, Jesus has had a huge impact on our world and on our culture. And so I'm hoping that tomorrow night, that's at least enough to kind of wet everyone's whistle about, this person of Jesus. Now, we really haven't gotten into his teaching, his message, what he was all about. But, of course, that's what I'm hoping that we're going to get into in the weeks ahead. But Jesus was an amazing guy. And honestly, one of the things I think we have to correct are the misrepresentations and the wrong assumptions that we have about Jesus. That come, honestly, I hate to say it, mostly come from Christians, mostly come from the church, which are ideas that Jesus hates sinners, and that Jesus is on the side of the religious people. That is absolutely not the case. I mean, when you read the Gospels, what you read is that Jesus is criticized for hanging out with drunks and prostitutes, for being outside the synagogue, outside the homes of the religious leaders, and hanging out with lepers and again the quote unquote sinners. And he loved them. He wasn't condemning them. He loved them, and they knew that he loved them. Now, he was the most critical and the most harsh to the religious leaders of the day, the religious elite, if you will, those who were the most religious, those who seemed to have it all figured out and have it all together, the most righteous ones, were the ones really that got the most grief from Jesus. And yet these sinners, those on the outside, if you will, of the church, the non-Christians in our society, were the ones really that Jesus loved and spent time with and was hanging out with and was very loved by them and very, very welcomed by them. But of course, that's not what you see when you look at the church today. And that's one of the things I want us to, hopefully we can get into, is the fact that what's wrong with that picture? Like, why is it that if you ask people that aren't Christians what they think about Jesus, most of them have a very positive opinion of Jesus, right? They'll talk about how Jesus was for peace. Jesus loved people. Jesus was someone who forgave people. Jesus was someone who fed the poor and cared for the sick and healed the sick and those kinds of things. Whereas, that's not, unfortunately, not what you see the church being all about. When you ask the same people what they think about Christians or the church, they have a very opposite reaction. Jesus attracted these outsiders, whereas the church sort of repels them. For example, one of the reasons why I'm holding this meeting for non-Christians in this office park, which is the offices of Fuller Seminary, is that if I had it at a church, I couldn't get non-Christians to come. Non-Christians don't want to go to a church, right? They're very skeptical of Christians. And frankly, it's probably one of the reasons why not a lot of people will end up coming to this. I probably won't have 50 to 100 people show up. Not because there aren't 100 people out here in Orange County who are non-Christians who aren't interested in Jesus. I think there's probably thousands of non-Christians who are interested in Jesus. It's just that I can't find them all. It's hard to talk to those people and to reach those people with the idea that, hey, there's a meeting about this. But also the idea that even if I could, I think most of them would be very skeptical about the fact that, well, there's got to be some catch. This is some trick. This is some evangelistic tool. You're trying to get my money. You're trying to get me to join something. You're trying to get me to become a Christian, say a prayer, join your club, or things like that. And again, that's our fault. The church we own that. We've got to own that. That's our fault. So tomorrow night, again, please be praying for Wendy and I as we kind of get this meeting kicked off. Pray for the people that would come. Pray that those that are on the fence about it, but that really need to be there, that they will make a decision to come. That Wendy and I will be just filled supernaturally with this great love that Jesus has for them. That they would really know and sense the love of Christ in that place. And that as we begin to talk about this person of Jesus, this amazing, phenomenal, incredible person who Jesus was, the people will come and they'll be open to that. And then I'm going to be giving people some homework, of course, and things I want them to do during the week, because there's so many things we're not going to be able to get to. But I want us to be able to, to catch up some ground. So I'm going to be asking them to, I'd like, for example, to read through the Gospel of Mark. And I would encourage anyone listening to this to do that, Christian or not. You can read the Gospel of Mark in about an hour. Get something to drink, get a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and grab the Gospel of Mark. I would recommend it in a modern translation like NIV, NAS, ESV, something like that, and something easy to read and understand. And just begin to read it from beginning to end. That's the way, uninterrupted. Unplug your phone, put away your smartphone, maybe put on some music or something just for background sake. But just start reading it and read it beginning to end. And you can do this, by the way, with others if it'll help you to get 2 or 3 other people together and just take turns reading it. But don't stop to comment on it. Don't stop to give a commentary. Don't stop, have a conversation about it. Just plow through it. Just keep on reading, and don't stop to have any conversation about it until you're done reading it, because it's really best when you just take it all in one sitting like that. And the other thing I wanted to talk about in our meeting, it's very famous. You may have heard of it before. It's called A Solitary Life, One Solitary Life by a guy named James Allen Francis. It was written in 1963. And it goes like this. Here is a man who was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another obscure village where he worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30, and then for 3 years he was an itinerant preacher. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never owned a home. He never had a family. He never went to college. He never put his foot inside a big city. He never traveled 200 miles from the place where he was born. He never did one of the things that usually accompany greatness. He had no credentials but himself. He had nothing to do with this world except the naked power of his divine manhood. While still a young man, the tide of public opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. One of them denied him. He was turned over to his enemies. He went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between two thieves. His executioners gambled for the only piece of property he had on earth while he was dying, and that was his coat. When he was dead, he was taken down and laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. 19 wide centuries have come and gone, and today he is the centerpiece of the human race and the leader of the column of progress. I am far within the mark when I say that all the armies that have ever marched, and all the navies that ever were built, and all the parliaments that ever sat, all the kings that ever reigned, put together, have not affected the life of man upon this earth as powerfully as has that one solitary life. Amen. And that is why we're going to spend one night a week for the next 7 weeks looking at Jesus. What was his message? What is the gospel message? What is it? And most Christians don't understand what that is. What are his parables? What was the point of teaching parables in the first place? And why did he talk in parables? And what do they mean? What are they about? What is his manifesto? What is the Sermon on the Mount all about? This great sermon that he preached. What is it? What is it about? What does it mean? Why? What was he trying to communicate? What about the prophecies he made? Jesus was a prophet, but what did he prophesy? What happened? Has any of it happened? Can we verify that he really was a good prophet? Did he prophesy things that really did come to pass the way he said they would? And we'll look at that. And of course, in our final session, we'll look at the death and the resurrection of Christ. And do we have good reason to believe that Jesus really did rise from the dead? So anyway, that's what it's all going to be about. I'm looking forward to giving you guys some feedback on it, how it's going. I'll talk about the Christian one, of course, and how that goes tomorrow night, and give some updates as I go along as well on my blog at keithgiles.com, but also on podcast, and probably on the Christian version as well. Now, the Christian version is another wild card. I have no idea what's going to happen with that. I don't even know who's coming to that. Although I've been a little concerned that a lot of the Christians who have talked about coming to it seem to be the kind of, the comments that they made sound like what they want to talk about is everything except Jesus. And so I'm going to have to probably wrestle a little bit to get us and keep us on the topic of Jesus. Not religion, not doctrine, not the Bible, not apologetics, not prophecy, not the end times, not all kinds of other things, but just Jesus. We're going to do our best, and we'll see how that goes. But I'm glad my friend Dan Noddy is going to be with me for that one, because I'm going to need someone to tag team me on that one. Anyway, and thank you. Please understand that you, as people listening to my podcast, your prayers mean a lot. I really appreciate your prayers. I need them very, very much, and I consider you very much to be a part of this team moving forward. My prayer, I would love if some people came to Christ as a result of this. I would love if some people began to become disciples of Jesus as a result of this. I would love it even if maybe something like a house church gets started, or another group, Christian gathering gets started as a result of these series of meetings we're about to do. Something that's a little more permanent and long-standing, and we bear some fruit for the kingdom. And also that I learn something from this that I can take on the next time I do some meetings like this, which I plan to probably do some more, as long as it's not a complete train wreck. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, thanks a lot. Thanks for listening. Thank you for supporting and listening to my podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast as well on iTunes if you can. I would really appreciate that too. Good night. God bless, and let the kingdom come.